In just 3 fateful minutes, under the dim streetlights of a small town near Atlanta, a kind and innocent black teacher is pulled into a nightmare of racial discrimination by two ruthless police officers. They falsely accuse her and threaten her simply because her skin is different. But when all hope seems lost, a secret video from a passerby's phone and the courage of a traitor within the police force might just be the light at the end of the tunnel. Will the truth prevail to expose the darkness of corruption? Or will justice remain buried beneath the boot of those in power? Lena Brooks moved through life as if afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the world around her. At 38, she had never sought fame, never craved attention. But in the hearts of dozens of children at Willow Creek Elementary School near Atlanta, she was irreplaceable. Her presence in the classroom was like a gentle breeze through an open window, calm, patient, and quietly transformative. The students called her Miss Lena with affection, their faces lighting up each morning when she greeted them by name, leaning down to meet their eyes. In a world that often rushed past them, Lena stopped. She cared. She remembered. She listened. She lived alone in a small house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, where the imperfect lawns were tenderly maintained with all the love she could give. Each morning, she prepared her lessons by hand, using colored pens and sticky notes instead of a computer. Her fridge was covered with student drawings and small thank-you cards, and her living room smelled of peppermint tea, surrounded by piles of books and the soft glow of candlelight. On Saturdays, she volunteered at the local library, reading stories to children while their parents were at work. On Sundays, she taught a small poetry class at the community center, helping shy teenagers find their voices just as she had once found hers. Though gentle and soft-spoken, Lena possessed a quiet strength that not everyone could see at first glance. Her students sensed it in the way she never gave up on anyone, even the kids others labeled as difficult. The janitor at the school felt it in the way she greeted him each morning with a thank you. The principal saw it too, in the steady calm Lena brought to the classroom, acting as the thread that wove everything together. But outside the small world of her classroom, in the community center, Lena Brooks was virtually invisible to society. She didn't drive a fancy car, didn't have powerful friends, didn't appear on social media or in any headlines. And perhaps that's why, when tragedy struck, it felt particularly cruel, because the world often tramples on those it believes no one will notice. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light across the narrow streets of Millstone, Lena was driving home from the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park. She had just finished a long day of volunteering, guiding children through exhibits, telling them about Rosa Parks, the March on Washington, and the voices that were silenced but never disappeared. Her heart was full, tired in a way that felt pleasant after doing something meaningful. She softly hummed along to the tune of "A Change Is Gonna Come," her fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at the fading sky. The road ahead was quiet, with only the long shadows of trees and the flickering streetlights. Lena had just stopped at the grocery store for a few items: rice, bell peppers, eggs. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, filled with books, teaching materials, and a few reading comprehension charts she had prepared for the upcoming week. Everything seemed normal, nothing suspicious, nothing worth noting. But as she crossed the town line of Millstone, flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror, like a sudden storm that had no warning. Lena held her breath. Her hand automatically turned on the turn signal. She was sure she hadn't been speeding. She had driven this road dozens of times. All her papers were in order. But as she slowly pulled over to the side and heard the screeching of the police car's brakes behind her, an uneasy feeling crept over her, the kind of unease that can't be named, the kind that sends a chill down your spine for no apparent reason. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Two officers, male, white. They didn't seem in a hurry. No obstacles or accidents behind her car. And that was when the strange feeling started to creep in, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she knew deep down that she hadn't. She reached for her purse, her heart pounding, not because of guilt, but because of a fear only people like her could truly understand. The fear of being presumed guilty just for living normally. The fear of being ignored when trying to explain. The fear of standing out in a place where all she wanted was to blend in. Lena still believed in kindness, in politeness, in soft words, and sincere smiles. She still believed that she could explain her way out of any misunderstanding, that the teacher's badge pinned to her purse, her soft voice, or her friendly smile, surely those things would speak louder than the color of her skin. But the lights still flashed behind her. The patrol car door swung open, the heavy sound of boots hitting the pavement, and Lena Brooks, the kind, gentle woman living a quiet life, had no idea that fate was drawing near, ready to tear apart her peaceful world in just a few short minutes. The patrol car slammed its brakes right behind Lena, the headlights blinding her as they cut through the darkness. Lena took a deep breath, her hand moving instinctively toward the turn signal, like a reflex formed in the early days of learning to drive. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was sure of it. She wasn't speeding, the signal lights were functioning, and her vehicle documents were up to date. But the flashing lights behind her made everything feel uncertain, as if every line of logic in her mind was being scrambled by something nameless. She quietly pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and sat still, her hands on the steering wheel, her palms beginning to sweat. In her mind, a familiar reminder echoed, "Stay calm. Keep it brief. Don't resist." She had taught her students this when discussing civil rights. Now she was the one who had to apply it. The police car doors swung open, the heavy sound of boots hitting the pavement. One officer approached, tall, his face partially obscured by his cap. Lena lowered the window, and the flashlight beam hit her face, forcing her to squint. "License and registration." The man's voice rang out, cold as metal scraping stone. Lena nodded faintly, reached for her purse, took out her documents, and handed them over with both hands. "Hello, officer. Here are my license and registration." She tried to keep her tone gentle, polite, just like how she spoke to her students every day. But the man didn't respond. He just grabbed the papers, flipping through them quickly before glancing at his partner, who had emerged from the other side of the vehicle. His eyes never blinking, scanning every movement Lena made as if she were a true suspect. "Do you know your taillight is blinking?" the officer asked without looking at her. Lena hesitated for a moment, then replied softly, "I checked it this morning. It might be a loose connection. I'll fix it right away." No response, just thick silence. The air between them grew dense, as though something invisible was rising from the hot asphalt. The second officer stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over Lena's back seat. "Where are you coming from?" "I was volunteering at the MLK Park. Just finished." She didn't get to finish her sentence before the man cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You live in Millstone?" "Yes, I teach at the Millstone Community Center." Again, no response, just a cold stare, as if assessing the truth of each word she had said. Lena felt the tension but couldn't name it. They hadn't accused her of anything, hadn't threatened her, yet each glance, each motion sent a chill down her spine. It felt as though they were searching for a reason, or more precisely, they already had a reason. They were just waiting for the right moment. And Lena knew, if that moment came, her explanations might no longer matter. She sat still, her hands on the steering wheel, her gaze fixed forward. She didn't dare look left or right. She only listened to the sound of their breathing, their footsteps, as the two men quietly surrounded her in a world where the law no longer belonged to justice, but to those in power. Just then, the second officer, who had circled to the back of her car, stopped. He stood there silent, staring into the trunk. Then, without a word, he spoke. "We need to search the car." Lena turned her head, her heart pounding. I'm sorry, but may I ask why?" As soon as the question left her lips, the air inside the car seemed to thicken. The first officer tilted his head for the first time, his gaze clearer under the flashlight's beam. But instead of answering, he simply said, "Please step out of the car." Lena froze. She realized this moment was a turning point, and whatever happened next was no longer within her control. Lena stood frozen by the roadside, her hands trembling as they instinctively clasped in front of her chest like a shield against the mounting fear. The two officers, Dale and Travis, moved with precision, rummaging through her car with a calculated brutality that made her stomach churn. They never asked for her permission, never explained why they were doing this, and they certainly didn't wait for her consent. They didn't even acknowledge her presence, as if she were invisible. Dale ripped open the trunk, flinging bag after bag onto the pavement as though the contents of her car were nothing more than trash to be discarded. A bag of fresh vegetables tore open, spilling onto the ground, the tomatoes tumbling out, one rolling into the drain like a symbol of her helplessness. A textbook, one she'd used just hours before to teach her students, fell from the cluttered back seat, its pages flapping wildly in the wind before scattering onto the wet ground. Travis, meanwhile, crouched at the front seat, his hands tearing through each compartment with such force it felt intentional, as though he was trying to create chaos where there had been none. The harsh noise of his movements echoed in the stillness of the night. Lena's voice came out soft, almost pleading, "Please be gentle. Those are teaching materials, important documents." But her words disappeared into the cold silence, swallowed whole by the oppressive atmosphere. It was as though she didn't exist at all. Travis's eyes darted around, scanning the inside of the car before his gaze fell on the contents of her purse, sitting innocently on the hood of the car. Without hesitation, he pulled out a small, clear bag containing a fine white powder that gleamed in the harsh glow of the headlights. Lena's heart stopped. The world around her seemed to blur. She couldn't breathe. The sight of the bag, so out of place, so foreign, froze her in place. She couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Her body shook, but she could not move, could not scream. She simply stared, her mind racing, as Travis smoothly slipped the bag into her purse, tucking it in like it was part of some well-practiced routine. For a moment, Lena stood motionless, too stunned to react. Her mind refused to process the reality unfolding before her. Her heart was pounding so violently she thought it might break free from her chest. Her breath caught in her throat. "That hat's not mine," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I swear, that's not mine." Her words faltered, caught between disbelief and panic. She could feel her body betraying her, every inch of her skin screaming with confusion and terror. "Please, you've made a mistake." Her voice cracked, the weight of helplessness crashing down on her. Lena took a step forward, the tears welling in her eyes, her breath becoming ragged as she struggled to hold herself together. "I'm a teacher. I teach children. Please check the cameras. I just left the MLK park." She reached out her hand, trembling, as if desperate for any shred of understanding. But Dale, his eyes cold and unfeeling, merely sneered at her as he handed the bag over to Travis, signaling for him to continue the charade. "Ma'am, you're carrying illegal substances," Dale said, his voice as devoid of emotion as a scripted lie. The words hung in the air, heavy with malice. "It's in your purse. We'll take you in." Lena's legs buckled beneath her. She stumbled back, her mind refusing to accept what was happening. "No," she cried out, her voice breaking through the nightmare. "Please, I'm telling you, I don't know what that is. I didn't put it there. I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice was raw with desperation, the words tumbling out in a frantic, breathless rush. She reached out, hands shaking, pleading with him. "Please believe me." But Dale's expression remained unmoved. He simply stared at her with icy indifference. "All criminals say that," he sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Lena's body trembled uncontrollably. She felt as if the world was closing in around her. The sound of cold metal clinking against metal filled the air as Travis stepped forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt with deliberate slowness. He didn't speak, just approached her, his movements as stiff and impersonal as a machine. Lena's breath hitched in her throat as she realized what was happening. She raised her arms in a desperate attempt to resist, but it was too late. Travis grabbed her wrists and forced them behind her back, the cold steel of the cuffs biting into her skin. Lena gasped, a sharp cry escaping her lips as the pain surged through her arms. "No, please stop," she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal that washed over her. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm innocent. Please, you have to believe me." But her pleas were met with nothing but silence. The two men were unbothered, their faces impassive, their eyes empty of compassion. They simply did their job, indifferent to the life they were destroying in front of them. Dale leaned in, his cold laugh echoing in Lena's ears. "All criminals say that," he repeated, as if mocking her. His words were a final blow. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut was deafening, final. Lena's world spun, and before she could even gather her thoughts, before she could process what had just happened, she was yanked roughly to her feet. The men didn't care about her protests. They didn't care about her tears, her fear, or the innocence that was being torn from her with every passing second. They only cared about their own power, their ability to strip her of her dignity and silence her with nothing more than a pair of handcuffs. In an instant, Lena Brooks, the kind-hearted teacher, the devoted woman who had done nothing wrong, was dragged away from the car, from her life, from everything she knew. The sky above Millstone felt heavier than ever, as if it too was suffocating under the weight of the injustice that had just unfolded. The heavy clang of the steel door shutting behind her felt like it choked the very breath from Lena's chest. She stood motionless in the small, dingy cell, the flickering fluorescent light above casting a pale, sickly glow onto the walls stained with old, peeling blotches. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, urine, and sweat, an overwhelming stench that seemed to cling to her skin, making her dizzy. It was as if she had fallen into another world, a world where there were no rules, no light of reason or compassion. She slowly shuffled toward the rusted metal bench bolted to the wall, sitting down gingerly, her hands still swollen and red from the tight cuffs. Her body curled inward instinctively, trying to shrink into a corner of her own existence, a place where she could temporarily disappear from the cruel reality around her. Tears began to fall, silent and slow, tracing down her cheeks, soaking into the worn fabric of the shirt she'd worn all day, now creased and stained with dirt. There was no sobbing, no loud cries, only the quiet release of grief that had nowhere else to go. She lifted her gaze to the gray, oppressive space before her, her mind spinning with 1,000 unanswered questions. Why her? Why had her life, her quiet existence as a teacher, a woman who only cared for her students and her community, taken such a dark turn? She thought of the innocent faces of her students in the classroom, the carefree laughter at the community center, the weekend poetry readings. All of those moments now felt as distant as a beautiful dream, shattered beyond repair. Lena didn't know who out there still believed in her innocence or even thought of her at all. Each hour that passed within the cold confines of the cell only drained what little hope she had left. Her first night in this place wasn't just about physical confinement. It was the moment her belief in justice began to crack, leaving a void in her heart where once there had been kindness and light, a void that seemed impossible to fill, no matter how hard she tried. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the small slit in the steel door above, casting a dim beam onto the cold, sterile floor where Lena still sat curled up, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She hadn't been able to rest at all that night, not because of the clanging metal or the shouting from the neighboring cells, but because of the relentless panic gnawing at her about what was happening. She had thought she'd hit rock bottom in this nightmare, but everything had only just begun. When a female guard came to open the cell door and motioned for her to follow, Lena thought that finally, she might speak to someone with authority, someone who still had reason, someone who believed in justice. But what awaited her was not a fair hearing, but a group of officers waiting for her in the interrogation room, not to investigate, but to humiliate her as if it were some cheap game. "Look at this, a model teacher," one of the larger officers sneered, glancing at Lena like she was trash pulled from a gutter. "You teach kids how to sniff coke? Or do you show them how to hide drugs in textbooks?" Another officer, younger and with shaved blonde hair, snapped his fingers sharply. "She looks like a damn faker. Makes me sick to my stomach. You think I'm going to believe her sorry little face?" Lena stood frozen, unable to believe her ears. She had thought that even if she had been wrongfully arrested, at least she would be treated like a human being. But here, she was nothing more than a target for systematic humiliation, not because of what she had done, but because of the color of her skin. "People like you, I deal with them all the time," the first officer continued, his voice lowering as he pressed in on her. "All you do is cry and beg, but your bags are full of drugs. You think we're stupid?" Another one muttered, "Just another pretending to be educated. Should have locked you up a long time ago." Each word felt like a knife stabbing into Lena's self-worth. She struggled to hold herself together, but her legs were shaking, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles went white. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, that they had the wrong person, but her throat was dry, and deep down, she knew that speaking up would only make them enjoy her suffering more. They didn't want the truth. They wanted power, a justification to maintain their superiority and control. When she was finally led to meet her appointed lawyer, a middle-aged man in a disheveled suit who looked like he had been dragged from a meeting to deal with small-time cases, Lena rushed toward him, grabbing at the last shred of hope she had left. "I've been framed," she said, her voice almost breaking. "They put that in my purse. I never touched that in my life." But the lawyer just stared at her, then sighed, placing a file onto the table with an air of indifference. "Do you know what the statistics are for innocent people in cases like this?" he asked without waiting for her response. "They caught you with illegal substances. That's the legal truth, and that's what we have to work with." Lena looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "You don't believe me?" "I believe in statistics," he replied coldly. "And if you want to scream about justice, I'm not the one to help you with that. I'm here to make sure you don't get hit with a heavier sentence. And if you keep insisting you're innocent, there's nothing I can do." His words crushed the last of Lena's fragile hope. She sat there in silence, hearing the rustling of paper, the hum of the air conditioning above, and feeling herself falling into a dark abyss, a place where justice was just a slogan on the wall, no more than that. The system she had once believed in, when she had taught her students was the symbol of truth and fairness, was now turning her into a scapegoat, humiliated and abandoned without a fight. And what was the most terrifying of all was that no one seemed to care. Lena sat motionless in the empty interrogation room, a place where, less than 10 minutes ago, the only person supposed to be called her defense attorney had coldly stamped out the last flicker of trust she had in the system. She could no longer hear the steady hum of the ceiling fan or the dim flickering light above. Everything became distant, blurred, as if she were being drawn into a void of chilling emptiness. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry and raw. She wanted to cry, but her tears seemed to have dried up. She felt as if she were no longer human, but a file with a label stamped on it. Suspect, criminal, failure. A young officer, the only one in the past 24 hours who had not thrown her a look of disdain, quietly opened the door, speaking in brief, clipped words. "You're allowed one call. 3 minutes." He led her down a narrow hallway to a worn public phone mounted on the wall. Lena approached it as though walking toward the edge of an abyss, where she was about to gamble the rest of her life on a fragile phone call. Her fingers trembled as they pressed each number, mentally reciting it like a familiar habit she hadn't used in years. Maya's number. Her sister's number. The person Lena had always avoided mentioning in casual conversations, not because she didn't love her, but because she didn't want to live in the shadow of someone too great. Maya Brooks, the newly appointed U.S. Attorney General, the first black woman to hold that position, a symbol of hope, pride, and intellect, was also Lena's older sister. They had grown up together in a modest neighborhood in Los Angeles, once sharing a dream of making the world a more just place. Lena chose the classroom. Maya chose the courtroom. And now, in the midst of this nightmare, Lena could only hope that Maya would remember the promise from years ago. "If you ever need me, just call, and I'll be there." The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Lena closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She imagined her sister's familiar voice answering. Imagined Maya asking right away, "Lena, where are you? What's happening to you?" But then, instead of her voice, only the cold, robotic message came through. "I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the beep." The world collapsed. Lena stood frozen, her hands still holding the receiver, as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. A part of her wanted to call back. A part of her wanted to scream into the voicemail. But instead, she whispered softly, "Maya, if you hear this, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. They're trying to destroy my life." Her voice caught, then broke apart. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person, right, sister?" The call ended with a harsh beep. Lena hung up, but her hand remained clenched around the receiver. She leaned her forehead against the cold wall behind the phone, her eyes squeezed shut. There was no one out there, no trust left to be returned, no explanation left to be heard. All that remained was the echo of herself in a system that had already decided to bury her from the moment they saw the color of her skin. In the expansive office on the top floor of the U.S. Department of Justice headquarters in Washington, D.C., the midday light streamed through thick glass windows, casting soft golden streaks across Maya Brooks's desk. Her schedule was packed from morning to night with piles of federal case files stacked high, and every minute of her day meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. But when the door creaked open and her young assistant, Alina, entered with a tense look on her face, Maya instantly felt something was wrong. Alina, who never dared to interrupt her during strategy meetings with Homeland Security unless it was something truly urgent, had only done so now because something serious was unfolding. "Madam Attorney General, I'm sorry for the interruption," Alina said, her voice quiet but quick. "There's an urgent voicemail from Miss Lena Brooks. It was just sent to your backup voicemail." Maya's hand froze midair, the highlighter she'd been holding pausing just above the file. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Her heart skipped a beat. Lena, her younger sister, who rarely called unless it was a holiday, a birthday, or a special occasion, had never once left a voicemail, let alone sent one to her private emergency line. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Maya's brow furrowed, her eyes narrowed in focus. "Play it for me," she said, her voice suddenly colder, sharper. Alina quickly moved to the phone on Maya's desk, pressing a button to bring the voicemail to life. As the message began to play, everything around Maya seemed to disappear. Her pulse quickened, her gaze fixated solely on the speaker as Lena's voice filled the room. "Maya, if you hear this, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. They're trying to destroy my life." Lena's voice broke, raw and full of emotion. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person, right, sister? By the time Lena's final plea broke through the speaker, Maya was already standing, her body stiffened, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. A violent, fiery rage surged through her, a feeling so intense, so primal, it eclipsed any political scandal or public outrage she'd ever encountered. This was her sister, the woman who had always quietly lived, who had taught in silence, who had always done good in the world. Now that same woman was shattered, pleading for help in a nightmare that Maya couldn't even begin to comprehend. Where is she? Maya's voice came out in a low growl, filled with pure fury. Alina froze, but was quick to respond. Track Lena's last known location. Get a direct line to the FBI's Atlanta office. I want everything from the Millstone Police Department. Officers' names, incident reports, photographs, any and all evidence. Now, Maya paced around her desk, her mind racing. Her thoughts were a blur, but the one thing that was crystal clear was this. Lena did not get into trouble like this. Someone did this to her, and I'm going to burn the whole damn system down to get to the truth. Alina nodded and quickly left the room to carry out Maya's instructions, but Maya barely noticed. She was too consumed by the fiery anger that had consumed her from the inside out. She stared at her computer screen, but all the national security documents, the crucial case files, everything faded from her vision. The only thing that remained clear was Lena's face, the little girl who once held her hand as they walked through their childhood home, who cried over being bullied in school, who had learned how to teach from the old books Maya had left behind. And now she was sitting in some dark, lonely jail cell, alone, afraid, and crushed by a system that was supposed to protect her. Maya's breath hitched as she looked at her desk, her hands shaking. She couldn't do this alone, but she couldn't stand by and let this happen to Lena. Her sister needed her, and Maya would do whatever it took to make sure Lena wasn't lost to this broken system. I'm coming, sister, Maya whispered to herself, her voice trembling but fierce. I'm here now. With those words, a new chapter began. It wasn't about politics or power. It was about a sister's love, the kind that would stop at nothing to save the woman who had always been there for her. And no matter what it took, Maya would tear apart the world if that's what it took to get Lena back. Less than an hour after hearing Lena's voicemail, Maya Brooks was standing in an emergency meeting room on the 6th floor of the Department of Justice, a space typically reserved for federal cases of national importance. Under the bright white lights from the ceiling, the atmosphere was palpably different. This was no ordinary technical briefing on bank fraud or domestic terrorism. The room buzzed with an odd, uneasy silence, one that mixed admiration with confusion. This time, it wasn't a national security matter being discussed. It was a case where the most powerful woman in the justice system had launched an investigation, and the target wasn't an international crime syndicate. It was a small police department in Georgia. Maya stood tall, her hands firmly planted on the conference table. Her voice was calm but resolute. I've just received an urgent message from my sister, Lena Brooks. She is currently being held at the Millstone Police Station. She's an ordinary citizen, an elementary school teacher with no criminal record and no affiliations with any organization. And I have reason to believe that she's the victim of a deliberate setup by the very officers sworn to protect her. A few pairs of eyes exchanged glances, some shocked, some doubtful. But Maya didn't let them interrupt. I'm not waiting for the usual administrative processes. I'm establishing a special task force in collaboration with the FBI and the Office of Civil Rights. If anyone feels uncomfortable with this, you are free to leave this room right now. No one moved. Maya glanced at her chief assistant, Alina, signaling for her to act. List all key personnel from Millstone. I need their internal complaint history, the frequency of use of force, and any arrests involving racial factors in the past 2 years. She turned to an FBI agent seated near the window. Agent Collins, I want you to lead this task force. Get to Millstone this afternoon. Bring a legal expert, a data technician, and a media coordinator. This is not just a wrongful arrest. This could be a link in a rotten system. A senior advisor, known in political circles for his excessive caution, suddenly spoke up. Madam Attorney General, if you personally involve yourself in a case that involves a family member, there's a risk of a conflict of interest charge. This could create unnecessary tension with our allies in Georgia. Maya turned her sharp, steely gaze toward him, her eyes as sharp as a freshly honed blade. What do you suggest then? Sit in my office while an innocent woman is dragged to hell because we're too afraid of losing political points. No one responded. Maya stepped away from the table, her voice hard as steel. If necessary, I'll take personal responsibility. But I'd rather be criticized for taking action than watch my sister fall apart in the hands of a system I'm supposed to lead, doing nothing. Her words echoed in the room, silencing everyone. For a moment, they no longer saw the Attorney General carrying out her duties. They saw a sister, a woman willing to take risks to protect the truth. And in that moment, Maya's courage made everyone in that room, and every onlooker following her journey, feel something profound. Justice cannot simply be a piece of paper. It must be protected with the heart, with action, and sometimes with personal honor. The second night at Millstone's jail didn't bring Lena sleep, but blood and the laughter of those in power. As she tried to close her eyes, lying on the cold metal bench with her wrists still swollen from the tight cuffs, the door to her cell creaked open with a warning screech. From the darkness, a massive figure stepped in, not to check on her, not to ask questions, but carrying with him a silent threat that radiated from every slow, deliberate step. "Get up, you filthy bitch," he hissed, his voice low and dripping with contempt. Lena jolted upright, still disoriented, before being yanked to her feet by the collar of her shirt. The guard was Raleigh, a fat white man whose breath reeked of cheap liquor and stale cigarettes. He grabbed her arm roughly and slammed her against the wall. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he spat. "A damn black teacher like you? Think you've got the right to cry, to make phone calls and get us under scrutiny?" He hissed, each word as if it were poison meant for her ears. Lena shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to call my lawyer." Before she could finish, a brutal slap landed across her face, knocking her head into the wall. The sharp pain rang through her skull, her ears ringing, and a metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. "You have no idea what's good for you, huh?" Raleigh sneered, leaning in close. "In here, I'm the law. I'm the justice. And I hate your kind, always pretending to be decent while hiding the filth in your pockets." Lena crumpled to the floor, clutching her face as her body shook with fear. She had never been hit in her life, never called those vile names. But Raleigh didn't stop. He leaned over her, whispering in her ear, his voice calm and cold as stone. "You better shut that mouth of yours. Don't even think about telling anyone. We've got 100 ways to make you disappear. No one's going to remember some black woman arrested for drugs. And even if someone hears, no one will believe you." The next morning, when another officer on duty, Malik Tyler, a younger man who seemed less hardened than the others, entered to check on the cells, he stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of Lena. She was sitting on the floor, her lips split, eyes bruised, her body curled protectively as though she had just survived a violent storm. "My God, who?" Malik started, but Lena didn't answer. She turned her face away, but her wet, swollen eyes spoke volumes. Malik swallowed hard, pulling out his phone as he left the room. He secretly dialed a number he'd found through the morning's press report, the office of the U.S. Attorney General, Maya Brooks. When the call connected and Malik's hesitant voice crackled through the line, Maya froze in the hallway of the Atlanta Justice Building. She had been preparing to leave for Millstone when she heard 3 words that froze her blood. "She's been beaten." Her entire body went rigid. That was all she could hear. No further explanation, no details needed, just the image that flashed in her mind. Lena, her gentle, sweet sister who had never raised her voice at anyone, now lying on a prison floor, bruised, her eyes filled with despair. Maya didn't speak for a few seconds, but when she did, her voice was low, like the rumbling of a storm that had just awakened beneath the earth. "Thank you. Keep her safe. I'm on my way." She hung up the phone, turned to her assistant and the FBI agent standing by, her eyes as cold as steel. "We're not just dealing with a wrongful arrest. This is torture. It's human rights abuse. It's the crime of a rotting system that's corrupt to its core." She paused for a brief second, her voice trembling with fury. "And I swear, I will tear that damn town apart to expose every filthy person involved, even if it means bringing Washington down to Georgia." Talia Evans, a 60-year-old black woman with salt and pepper hair and glasses slipping down her nose, never imagined that on this night, as she was heading home from her late shift at the small bakery on the outskirts of town, she would become a witness to something horrifying. As her car silently cruised down a quiet stretch of road on the edge of Millstone, the flashing red and blue lights ahead made her slow down, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. Through the slightly cracked window, she saw a young woman, small hands raised, being flanked by 2 white officers. A familiar scene, but this time the pain was visible before her eyes. not on a news screen or a bloody memory from the past. Talia quickly grabbed her phone from the passenger seat, trembling as she switched to video mode, her hands slightly covering part of her face as if she too was violating something sacred. The video lasted less than 3 minutes, but every second felt like a boulder crushing her heart. She could clearly hear the woman's voice pleading, "I haven't done anything wrong. Please believe me." And then watched as one of the white officers bent down, secretly pulling out a small plastic bag from his jacket and slipping it into the woman's purse. Talia held her breath, her heart racing, her lips tightly pressed together in fury. When the sound of the handcuffs clinking echoed through the air and the mocking, cold laughter of the tall officer rang out in the darkness, Talia gripped the steering wheel, fighting the urge to scream. When the clip ended, she broke down, not just because of the injustice unfolding, but because it was so familiar, like witnessing herself being stopped years ago, falsely accused of driving a car that didn't fit the type. Talia sat in her dimly lit kitchen, replaying the video on her phone, each time rewinding it a little more as if to convince herself that it was real. She knew the weight of what she had recorded. This wasn't just evidence, it was a blade cutting through a veil of lies. She had watched the news that morning, seeing the woman's face, Lena Brooks, labeled a suspect, a drug dealer. But Talia knew the truth. She saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, the trembling in her plea. No one could fake that kind of pain. No one could fabricate the moment when justice was so blatantly twisted. Talia knew she couldn't keep it to herself, but where could she send it? She called 3 local newsrooms, the Millstone Gazette, the regional news channel W89, and finally, a widely followed community news site. At each place, she sent the video along with a brief note urging them to please watch and do the right thing. But as the day passed, then 2 days, only silence came back to her. One editor finally responded with a curt message. "Sorry, we cannot verify the source. Furthermore, this is a sensitive issue involving law enforcement." Talia read the message over and over, her blood rising in anger. Sensitive? What could be more alarming than a police officer planting drugs in an innocent woman's purse? She placed the phone down on the table, her old hands clenching into fists. On one side was fear, fear of retaliation, fear of her name being exposed, fear of the sneers and threats that had crushed her youth. But on the other side was the truth, and this time she decided she wouldn't turn away. "If they won't publish it," she whispered to herself, "I'll find another place." The truth cannot die in silence. Then came the 4th day, and still, nothing happened. Talia quietly checked every news outlet, every morning update, and everything remained the same. Lena was still being held, still labeled as a drug suspect, and Millstone was as silent as if no injustice had ever occurred. She called back a young reporter who had responded to her initial email, but the phone just rang and went to voicemail. Talia understood. They didn't want to get involved. They were scared. The Millstone Police Department had power, political ties, and the ability to crush anyone who dared to speak up. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing the hollows under her eyes, as though a part of her had aged several years in just a few short days. "Who am I?" she asked herself. "A 60-year-old woman living in a neighborhood where no one remembers my name? Who will listen to me?" When Talia opened the video once again, this time only to remind herself that it was real, she felt an emptiness in her chest. The truth had been recorded, but it seemed no one wanted to look at it, not because they didn't know, but because they didn't want to know. And in that silence, she felt something more terrifying than the cuffs, more terrifying than the racist slurs. The truth was becoming invisible. In a small apartment near the end of the week, Jamal Pierce, a young officer in the Millstone Police Department, sat in a daze in front of his phone screen, unable to tear his eyes away from the video that was rapidly spreading across social media. The video, shot by Talia Evans, an elderly bystander, had exposed the full truth of the events that unfolded that night. It was as if everything in his life suddenly became clear. Jamal had been a cop for 3 years, but nothing he had witnessed during his time on the force compared to the horror that this video now revealed. Dale and Travis, the colleagues he had once admired, were now the perpetrators of a cruel and deceitful story. He remembered the times he had seen them act in the shadows, ignoring protocol and flouting the law. He had once thought that was part of the job, that sometimes you have to do that to protect the community. But now, seeing Lena, a completely innocent woman, treated like an animal, everything suddenly felt wrong in a way that couldn't be justified. Jamal exhaled deeply, his heart heavy with guilt. He turned to look at the empty room where his police uniform still hung on a hook, the worn shirt that had been with him through countless days. The feeling of guilt and shame surged within him, as if the very job he had chosen was now keeping him from doing the right thing. He knew that standing up against his colleagues would never be easy. In fact, if he chose to do so, it might cost him his career or even his life. But as he thought about Lena's cries, the image of her being beaten in the darkness, Jamal couldn't turn away. He couldn't remain silent, allowing evil to spread unchecked. He picked up his phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through his contacts. He had heard of Maya Brooks, the U.S. Attorney General who was leading the investigation and fighting for justice. Part of him wanted to remain silent, to preserve his own safety, but another part of him urged him to act. He hesitated for a moment before dialing her number. Not saying a word when the other line picked up, he sighed, then spoke softly but firmly. "I want to help. I have information about what happened in Millstone. Those cops, they need to pay for what they've done." Jamal didn't know what he would face by making this decision, but one thing he was sure of was that he could no longer let fear rule him. Jamal's action was the faintest glimmer of light in the nightmare, and through his courage, hope began to emerge. Jamal Pierce couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the images of Lena being beaten and falsely accused flashed vividly in his mind. He knew what he was doing was the right thing, but the cost was steep. Since deciding to speak out against Dale and Travis, he could feel the tension mounting with each passing day. From the furtive glances of his colleagues to the murmurs of gossip throughout the precinct, all eyes seemed to be on him. One evening, when he came home, he found his car had been vandalized. The tires were slashed, and the windshield was scratched to the point of being shattered. He knew it wasn't some random accident. It didn't stop there. His family started receiving threats over the phone, unidentified calls. The only thing audible through the line were cold, snarling words. "Watch what you're doing. You son of a, you have no idea who you're up against." The former officers of Millstone, whom he had once called colleagues, were no longer the people he could trust. The threats came fast and relentlessly, and it made him start to question whether his decision had been worth it. He stood at a crossroads, torn between being the good guy and protecting his family. The feeling of helplessness welled up inside him. If he continued down this path, what worse things were waiting for him and his loved ones ahead? In the jail cell, Lena lay on the cold metal bench, her body exhausted and her eyes filled with despair. But even in the worst of circumstances, a small glimmer of hope flickered within her. That night, one of her fellow inmates, who shared the cramped cell with her, whispered about a police officer, Jamal Pierce. She didn't know him, but when she heard about his brave actions, Lena's heart leapt. "He's the one who reported the incident," the inmate said. "He wants to help you." Though she was physically drained and had little left to trust in anyone, Lena felt that a flicker of hope still burned inside her. "There are still good people in the world," she whispered to herself. And in that moment, she prayed for Jamal. The prayer was soft but strong. Lena knew he was facing dangers of his own, but she also knew that his courage might be the only thing that could save her and others like her from this nightmare. A sense of peace washed over her, even though pain and exhaustion still clouded her mind. As she thought about what Jamal was doing, Lena whispered, "I believe you won't give up." Her eyes lit up in the darkness. Her patience was the clearest proof of courage in the darkest of times. On the day Maya Brooks held the press conference, the light of truth exploded with the force of a lightning bolt in the darkened sky. The press room was packed with journalists, officials, and citizens who had gathered to witness an unavoidable confrontation. Maya stepped through the door, her presence commanding and decisive, leaving everyone in stunned silence. In her hand, she held a small projector showing Talia Evans's video, which revealed the horrific scene of Lena being assaulted and falsely accused by Dale and Travis. The room fell dead silent as the footage played, while Jamal's testimony was read aloud, confirming the criminal actions of the two officers. "Millstone is not a normal community," Maya declared, her sharp gaze locking onto the officials behind her. "This is a breeding ground for corruption where justice doesn't exist. I demand an immediate federal investigation." She emphasized one point over and over. The truth will not be buried any longer. No one is above justice. Maya stood tall, her gaze unwavering, and in that moment, everyone watching, whether in the room or on television, felt a powerful wave of courage breaking through the wall of fear and injustice that had been built up for so long. When the video aired and Jamal's testimony was made public, a wave of outrage immediately swept over Millstone. The police who were supposed to protect justice were now the abusers of power. But for Dale and Travis, who were now arrested, their arrogance remained unshaken. In the face of federal agents and the press, they scoffed, proud of their actions, believing the system would shield them. "We're just doing our job," Travis said, his voice hollow but dripping with arrogance. This so-called truth is just a joke. But the people of Millstone would not remain silent any longer. They stood outside the police station holding up signs demanding justice. And even those who once respected the police could no longer ignore the brutality. The Millstone police were no longer a symbol of protection, but a representation of everything wrong with society. The protest grew louder, and the chants of justice for Lena rang through the streets, a rallying cry for all those who had suffered injustice. Late in the afternoon, as the investigation began to gain momentum and Dale and Travis were arrested, the scene at the police station left everyone who was there choked with emotion. Lena was finally released after enduring days of pain and loss. As she stepped out of the gates of the police station, tears streamed down her face, not out of sorrow but out of joy. Though her face was battered and her hands still swollen from the tight cuffs, there was something unmistakably different in her eyes. It was hope and justice. She saw Maya standing there, arms open wide. Lena ran to her, embracing Maya in the midst of the cheering crowd. Tears fell from her eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of joy after the storm. "I made it," Lena said, her voice choked with emotion. Maya held her even tighter, whispering, "We made it. Justice has prevailed." These words were not just a comfort. They were a promise of a new future, a future where those who dared to stand against cruelty would not be abandoned. In that moment, faith in the goodness of the world was revived. After the long, dark days, Lena finally returned to her beloved work, standing before the classroom, imparting knowledge to innocent children. This time, she was no longer the meek, nameless teacher of Millstone, but a hero in the eyes of her students and their parents. As she stepped into the classroom, the children jumped out of their seats, clapping and shouting her name as if she were a celebrity. Their eyes were filled with respect, admiration, and an unwavering belief in her. The parents waiting outside the hall couldn't hide their emotions either, looking at her as a victor, a testament to the relentless fight for justice. Lena smiled, as gentle as ever, but within her heart, there burned a fiercer flame than ever before. She had overcome the worst nightmare of her life, and now she was a symbol of resilience, a light in the darkness. The belief in humanity and justice had been restored, and Lena knew her life would never be the same again. Since the truth was revealed, the courageous actions of individuals had sparked a powerful wave of change. Jamal Pierce was honored by human rights organizations and justice groups. He had become a symbol of truth, a hero who stood bravely against evil, unshaken by fear. No longer just a small-town officer in Millstone, Jamal was now a hero in the eyes of many, proud of the change he had helped create. Talia Evans, whose courage had led her to bring the video into the light, wrote a book about her experience. She shared her journey of witnessing evil, but also a journey of faith and justice. Her book became widely read, an inspiration for those who doubted the power of individual actions. And Maya Brooks, continuing her work as U.S. Attorney General, remained at the forefront of battling injustice in the legal system, pushing for broad-reaching reforms across the country. The courage of these individuals spread far and wide, reminding everyone that belief in the good could never be extinguished, no matter how harsh the challenges. Lena stood in the schoolyard, the warm sunlight shining down on her face as the camera started rolling toward her. She gazed into the lens, her eyes filled with thoughts and unforgettable experiences. "The nightmare is over," Lena said, her voice soft but strong. "But don't let cruelty win. Be the light." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to settle in the air, then continued. "Justice isn't something we can expect without fighting for it. Each one of us can be the guiding light, helping those who need protection. Never think that a small action is meaningless. If we stand up for the truth, light will always find a way to shine." Her words resonated powerfully, like advice, a final message for all those still struggling in the dark. She had once been a victim, but now she was a symbol of faith and resilience. Justice would never remain silent, and those determined to walk the right path would never be alone. As the story reaches its powerful conclusion, We want to take a moment to thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Your support and engagement have made this journey even more meaningful. If you felt inspired by the courage, truth, and resilience shown in this story, remember that your voice and actions can make a difference too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this, where we stand up for what's right and continue to fight for justice. Let's keep the light of truth shining, and together, we can create a better world. Thank you for being part of Emotional Journey. Until next time.